Well, good morning. I'm MMAC President Tim Sheehy, and welcome back to our weekly webcast from 11 to 12 on Tuesdays, providing you with actionable insights to navigate the COVID crisis as we move through the next normal. This webcast is powered by Aurora WDC, a Madison-based market and intelligence firm. They help us make faster and smarter decisions. Visit them at aurorawdc.com. And before we begin, some advice from Mike Maltesta, president of ERC Midwest, providing decontamination and disinfection services. 1, have a WHO plan. For example, who will you call if you need help on contamination? 2, know what it takes to kill COVID-19. Be knowledgeable of CDC and EPA guidelines. 3, get what you pay for. Be aware of the deliverables in the service. 4, demand proof. Get a COVID-19 disinfection certification. And 5, pay the right price to have it done properly and no more. ERC Midwest is a COVID-19 disinfection, has a COVID-19 disinfection certificate and a discount for MMAC members with a guaranteed lowest price. Go to ercmidwest.com/MMAC to find out more. Now, today's program will help you and your businesses through the next normal by hearing from 3 highly respected business leaders. What will it take to bring your team safely back to work in your facilities? What considerations should you be making for those who are working remotely? What lessons have we learned, and what will change in how your teams work? How will you build confidence in a safe working environment? To answer these questions and yours, we're joined by Michelle Nettles, Chief People and Cultural Officer for ManpowerGroup, Cal Schattschneider, Vice President, Campus Planning and Operations for Northwestern Mutual, and Sarah Heronymus-Rolfs, Senior Director of Human Resources at Direct Supply. So I'm going to start each out with a question, and then we'll draw from our viewers. So Michelle, let's start with you. Manpower certainly has a global presence and has been engaged in the COVID crisis all over the country. So talk to us a little bit how Manpower has responded and some of the lessons that you've learned.
So Tim, thank you. And thank you to Sarah and Cal. I know Cal, you and I have been on several calls, and our response is really not terribly different from many of yours. We've just had the benefit of learning through having a global footprint. So Jonas often talks about the waves in which we've seen this pandemic hit our business and hit the world, and obviously hit home. So with that, just want to share a couple of thoughts with you so we can progress to the next slide. Early on, Jonas was very clear that we were going to have a people-first approach to everything that we did. And we know that getting people back to work safely is really what is most important, and how do we position that, not just for our employees, but for our workers in the entire Milwaukee community. Next slide, please. So with that, what we've seen over the last couple of months is that the employer-employee relationship has changed rapidly overnight. Overnight, roles have expanded from, workers literally having to care for their family members, but to teach, to cook, to clean, to do all of those things, still while trying to be productive in the workspace. But we've also seen the change for employers. And if you look at the slide to the right, it just pictures how the employer's role has changed dramatically to being a healthcare provider, having to be much more of a global and a local citizen, really moving into healthcare and having to provide healthcare solutions and answering questions that we've not had to do before. And so that relationship has changed. And I would argue that it is shaping what our new normal will be. It will not go back to what it used to be, but we have to take a look at this now to determine if this is the direction that we should be headed in. At the moment, employer and worker are really working together to help, address the crisis. Next slide, please. When we look across and as I said earlier, we've had the benefit of looking across the globe, and we first saw this in our Asia Pacific region, and then we saw it in Europe and then North America, and now we're seeing it in LATAM, particularly in Brazil. But what we've seen when companies and countries have gone back to work is really a four-way partnership between the government, the employer, the worker, and healthcare providers and science. And when there are reasonable guidelines and there's clear support for T3, that's testing, tracking, and tracing. When there's clear support for that, it makes it easier for the employer to re-engage and to restart back to work. But it does something more powerful than that. It helps build consumer confidence. And when you have employers complying with those safety guidelines, but also stepping back and collaborating and partnering across and learning from each other, employers are able to be a lighthouse for stability. And what we see is employers really stepping back, trying to think about their social impact. And I know here in Milwaukee, ManpowerGroup, really, we've paused to say, how quickly do we need to get our employees back into our HQ? If we do, what's the broader impact to the Milwaukee community? And what we also are seeing and we're mindful of, and we see this happening across the world, is that you see individuals who are already marginalized potentially being re-marginalized. So how do we think about our diversity and inclusion efforts and be mindful that, we have to think about our most vulnerable population, but the power of work is really still important to them and their families. One of the biggest things, and we've seen this happen, is really with workers. And if workers are not prepared to comply with wearing face masks, wearing a glove, staying the 6 feet physical distance apart, then that creates another issue. And it's really important that human behavior steps in and that we're not just thinking about ourselves as individuals, but we're thinking about our larger community. So really important that, workers and consumers really behave in compliance. And then lastly, which we've seen, and we've had the huge benefit here in Milwaukee with the medical college weekly town halls, but we've seen healthcare providers step up in amazing ways, but leading with science and leading with data, giving us that guidance across from country to country, region to region. When we've seen these four working together, it's made an easier, a safer return to work. And even with that, we do know from looking at South Korea, Singapore, Australia, that there still will be challenges. In Italy, likewise in the UK. But when those four organizations are working together and partnering together, I think you are able to create comfort and a sense of confidence, a sense of security that is needed in order to return to work. Next slide, please. So in addition to everyone doing their part, these are the guidelines that ManpowerGroup has provided from country to country. First, focusing on our organizational capabilities. Second, physical safety, what's required by state, local government, and then what will we do to protect both our associates and our employees. Well-being has been one of the big points that we've honed in on because we know that social isolation is creating emotional stress for a number of our workers, and not just our workers, our associates, but we hear this from other leading companies that they're dealing with the same issues. So we have been very thoughtful and proactive in addressing well-being. Performance is another one that we hear and we are mindful of, that there's the concept of out of sight, out of mind, and individuals aren't working and productivity levels are being tested. And I would say that any HR leader should be pushing on performance. It's not that if work can be done outside of the office, then those performance measures still should be taken into consideration, but into context, because again, those workers, they're parents, they're teachers, they're cooks, they're cleaners, they're doing it all at this time. So these are the guidelines that we provided to our regions and our countries. Next slide, please. And then finally, as we think about here in Milwaukee and specifically how we will get back to our HQ, it's simple: safely, slowly, and in segments. This will not happen overnight. In fact, on Friday, we sent out a note saying that our headquarters, we would not return until after the end of May. We're still evaluating when. There's no specific time that we've provided, but we've stepped back and looked at, how can we learn from each of our regions? How can we learn from our other states? How will we learn from our branches? Because we've also began putting where the law permits our branches and our employees back to work in our branches. So taking those learnings. Another one is just asking our employees, and we've surveyed our employees already to get a sense of how we're responding in this crisis, but also get their feedback on, do they prefer to continue to work from home or to return to the office? When we went into shelter in place at ManpowerGroup here in Milwaukee, we were able to get virtually 100% of our workforce able to work remotely. That's a huge benefit, and we know that. And so with that, we are asking our employees what's their choice. Some of them are still dealing with childcare, adult care during this time and may not be able to return to the office. Continue to communicate often and frequently, but then this gives us time to truly prepare our office and looking at, what does it look like to be 6 feet apart and in the elevator, in the stairwell, ingress and egress, in the cafeteria. How are we thinking through that? We will continue to do that into the summer and use this as an opportunity to advance working from wherever and flex models of working. But again, communication will remain critical throughout this time. And even when we don't have news, we would prefer to communicate. And then we imagine and envision that this will continue into the late summer and into the fall. And even in the fall time where, there are projections around a spike will likely increase. So we're thinking as much as possible ahead, but quite honestly, we cannot predict. And we're continuing to work across our regions and with partners to learn more, but we may even have to continue our progression back to the office even into the winter. So that's it from ManpowerGroup standpoint. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, Michelle, thank you very much for that overview, and look forward to kind of asking questions along with the audience. And so let me bring Cal in here and get a little perspective from the standpoint of Northwestern Mutual. And Cal, obviously, for those who aren't aware, you have 2 really large campuses in the Milwaukee area. But whether you have a large campus or a smaller campus, how are you thinking about bringing people back, making them feel safe? What does that look like from the perspective of Northwestern Mutual?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tim, and thanks for the opportunity to speak with everybody today. So as you had mentioned, for quick background, at Northwestern Mutual, just to give everybody some context, so we have about 6,000 employees in Wisconsin. We have a few hundred in New York, but for today's purpose, we'll talk about the Wisconsin employees. I guess another important factor is that we own our own buildings. When you lease buildings, there's different implications about returning to work. So for today, I thought I would just focus on the Wisconsin return to campus for our employees. Our overall strategy as a company, similar to what I've heard from many other companies, is that we're going to be returning to work when you can be as productive as you are today working from home or wherever you are working remotely. That's criteria number 1. Criteria number 2 is, we want you to return when you can be as safe as you are today. So if coming back to work doesn't add any value, and because of the on-site requirements of social distancing and all those important factors, or if getting to work causes more risk because of transportation or your own personal circumstances, then why return to campus? So we're having a very slow and measured pace from our perspective. And in some sense, we're fortunate as a business because we've been doing very well, and our employees are staying, vast majority of them are staying really productive working outside of the office. So with that as a backdrop, slow and steady is our plan. And so given that, we've created 4 phases that we've been talking about in order to matriculate back into our campus. And knowing that those phases might overlap, we might have to go back, based on what's going on. And as Michelle just said, factoring in everything from the government to other, medical conditions, all those things that we're all paying attention to. But as far as just having some stakes in the ground, we have these 4 phases. So right now, to describe what we have going on today, we have just essential workers in our campuses. And so for us, that's about 100, maybe 200 people total across both of our campuses and all of our buildings. So it's a very small percent of our 6,000 employees. So this phase 1 then, perhaps it's in the middle of June, going through the end of July. So similar to what Michelle was saying as well, it's essential on-site workers, yes. But for those that have had a reduction in productivity based on their ability to not get stuff done in the traditional office. And so to find that information out, we asked all of our different departments across the company and said, hey, who's unable to work as well as they would like to? And with this high hurdle rate of knowing when you come back, social distancing and all those other parameters will be in place. And so what we heard is a very small sliver, like 100, 200 people think, of people who are at this next layer. So this phase 1 is a very slow increase. Social distancing would stay in effect. As Michelle was saying too, we're not going to be opening our restaurant for people to go to. Our fitness centers will remain closed. We're not open to the public as we were in our tower in downtown Milwaukee. So we still have those limitations on in this phase 1, what we call the measured approach back in. And then based on different, the different gating criteria, phase 2 is what we're calling business imperative. So maybe this is adding 100 employees based on these specific criteria. We'd add in, yes, you can have gatherings less than 10. Maybe we start having our technology walk-up stations open again with queuing theory and staying 6 feet apart and doing all those important things. But it's, again, this next layer. Speaking of restaurant, for example, if this applies to you, we've been thinking about, rather than having people come to the restaurant, maybe we actually deliver it to the people. That eliminates a lot of foot traffic, eliminates a lot of elevators, escalators, all that kind of thing. So that's just one example of things that we're thinking about in that sort of phase 2 business imperative concept. So that's in August, for example. Again, all subject to change, but that's some current thinking. What else is going on at that time from an employee experience? Some conference rooms are probably open with reduced chairs and things like that we've all read about. So that's the kind of environment that we're talking about. Phase 3 then is this more what we're calling sort of the expansion. So that's, think in the fall, late fall. And again, based on the success of phase 2. And one of the other key factors at that point in time is what's the status with schools and daycares and public transportation. So, at that point, if we're adding a couple hundred employees per month, again, a very gradual increase, maybe slightly increased gatherings inside the office, but we're having those monthly go, no-go checkpoints along the way to see how we're doing as a campus and with our communities. And then maybe we're talking about something else we haven't talked about yet. We're thinking about maybe then there's some domestic travel for business need that's allowed at that later stage. But by the end of the year, just from an overall perspective, maybe we're at less than half of our staff on site, because from our perspective then that allows us to maintain that 6 foot, think about a floor plan in a checkerboard kind of way where you have people sitting every other one sort of. So that's kind of the feeling as we ramp things up before then phase 4 is the new normal, whatever that turns out to be. But that's in spring of 2021, and key criteria there is when there's a vaccine or treatment available, and we can kind of go back in that regard. So that's a high level approach from Northwestern Mutual, and happy to answer questions when the time comes.
Sure, Cal, let me ask you a couple right away. So,
Sure.
So how do you view dealing with kind of vendors and visitors coming to the office and at Northwestern Mutual? And again, while you have this ramp up of your employees, some obviously would be working remotely, some in the building. So how do you see handling kind of vendors, visitors, other meetings in the facility at Northwestern Mutual?
So we have very limited vendors today, of course, required to do some of the cleanings and things like that, and various construction things that need to be done. So very limited, the same overarching philosophy, very slow and steady from a contractor vendor perspective, with business essential kind of thinking applied there. From opening to the public and having the community in there too, very slow out into the future, phase 3 kind of late fall thinking before we're even ready to entertain that. Because first and foremost, the health of employees is paramount. And so again, under the heading of we're as productive as we are, why rush? What's the impetus to push? So slow and steady on those regards as well.
And then Cal, question on travel. Obviously you have agencies all over the United States, probably a heavy travel schedule for a lot of people, and then including kind of the investment houses coming in and out. How do you view travel ramping up from Northwestern Mutual's perspective?
Yeah, that's another great question, because you're right. We have 10,000 financial advisors across the country that we typically visit with in person. Both as people, we like that interpersonal connection and relationship and face-to-face. So we are learning and developing another muscle, or strengthening that muscle, about virtual meetings and things. And so that's what we're doing now. And I know now I'm going to sound like a broken record, but that very slow and steady actual physical travel being applied to visiting with our field force as well. So them coming to us and us going to them. We're accomplishing a lot virtually. We had one of our first big meetings with a chunk of our field force. The leadership of our field force was done virtually. And it went really well. So we found that we were able to do that kind of thing. And so again, that just makes us feel like we can take this at our own measured pace, as opposed to being artificially pushed into doing some sort of thing that causes more risk than we need to take.
Very, very helpful, Cal. Thank you.
Sure.
And as I bring Sarah in here to talk a little bit about direct supplies experience, I want to remind everybody, if you've got a question, please send it in, because we're going to spend the second half of the presentation here responding to your questions. So Sarah, again, thank you for joining us. I think it'll be helpful for folks, if they don't know direct supply, to start out, just to explain a little bit about direct supply. And your customers are actually in the crosshairs of the COVID crisis, many of them.
Yes, thank you, Tim. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's been nice to meet Cal and Michelle as well. For those of you who are unfamiliar with direct supply, we are the leading supplier of products, services, and technology to the senior living industry. So as Tim mentioned, we are in the crosshairs, as our company is an essential business servicing senior living and providing care for the millions of residents across the country. And so our team of employees, who also happen to be our employee owners, are working diligently to ensure that all of our customers are able to provide the best care for those living in the facilities, who may be our family members, our friends, our neighbors, to ensure they're well cared for. And so that really is the genesis of our return to campus plan, as we want to ensure that every one of our partner owners feels safe returning to work, has choice, and are very productive in the service of our customers. Eric, next slide. There are a number of objectives, and similar to what Cal and Michelle outlined, the first objective is to protect the health and safety of our partners and guests, as well as any of our other customers who may come to our campus to learn more about the services we provide to them. The second item is meeting the needs of our customers. We want to ensure that we're up and running to serve them as they're providing the direct care to the residents. And then last but not least, ensuring the continuity of our business and operations. We want to ensure that every one of our partners is productive and able to do their jobs remotely. Typically, our population is 20% remote, and the remainder of our workforce is spread between two campuses, primarily here in Milwaukee. And so we want to ensure that the individuals who are typically remote, as well as those who are learning how to work remotely, are able to do so. Next slide. In terms of our focus or our strategy, it's really anchored in 4 key areas. It's our partners, it's technology, it's our physical campuses, and communication. In regard to our partners, much like you heard from Michelle at ManpowerGroup, we are providing our partners with choice in their return to our campus. It is the central point of our strategy. So our partners have the opportunity to return anytime this summer through the first week of September, as we're thinking about it today. As Cal outlined, things are changing and evolving so quickly. that may change along the way, but our current thinking is that people would have the opportunity to make their choice and what's best for them and their families through that first week of September. We're actually just wrapping up a survey process where we asked all of our partners what their plans are. Our planning team anticipated that people would return throughout the summer, and that's exactly what we saw. People, for the most part, are indicating that they'll come back through the summer, primarily late summer and that first week of September. As Michelle outlined, we have parents who are working, they're teachers, they're trying to provide care in the home. And so giving our people that flexibility is vital, and they're telling us that they need it. And so we anticipate most of our people being back in September. All of that survey data is being consumed by our planning committee, by our executive leaders, as well as our data science team to ensure that we are working together and understanding the needs of the population and readying each part of our campus, building by building, workspace by workspace. In regard to technology, our tech team has been working diligently to ensure that all of our partners have the ability to work remote. There are some pockets of our business where they tend to be more, I would say, on the front lines or call center focused. And so we wanted to ensure that all of our inside sellers, our operators, and our customer service teams had the ability to also apply choice and work remotely and move their equipment where they needed it. So the tech teams have been working incredibly hard to ensure that our people could work effectively remotely, as well as anywhere on our campus. If any of you have been on our campuses before, you may recall that we have a lot of open space, bistros, collaboration space, and we want our partners to be able to continue to use that safely, of course, practicing good social distancing, ensuring the surfaces are clean, wearing of their masks. And so we're doing everything we can to give people multiple locations to work through technology while also keeping them safe. In regard to our campuses, we're doing all of the same things that Manpower and Northwestern Mutual outlined in terms of ensuring social distance, asking our partners to take their temperatures before they return to work, guests taking their temperatures, separate garbage bins for PPE, signage, floor markings, you name it, we're doing it to ensure that it's in front of our partners and we keep them as safe as possible. One of the newest things that we are most excited about at Direct Supply is our team of HVAC experts within our TELS business, which provides services and solutions to the facilities directly. Thus, the HVAC experts found a new solution that is essentially a healthcare grade air purification system. Today in our buildings, we use UV. We're going to be installing this new technology. And while I'm no expert like Cal in terms of campus operations, our team is on the call today, so credit to them. We will be installing something using bipolar needlepoint ionization. And essentially what this equipment does is it shoots ions out into the air, it attaches to the particles or the pathogens and neutralizes them, all without ozone. And so we are providing this for our senior living customers and also using it in our buildings to ensure our partners are safe when they return, whether it be those already on campus and those that will be returning through early September. And then again, lastly, communication. We want every one of our partner owners to feel safe returning to work, as well as any of our guests that are coming on campus. The biggest part of this return to campus plan, from my perspective, is a behavior change. Each and every one of us is going to need to learn how to think and operate differently. I certainly don't always think about social distance. I do today. I need to wear a mask when I'm not in my office or away from my desk. All things that may not be natural when I get back to the office, we're trying to keep that in front of our people through multiple channels. So we're communicating through regular town halls with our people, from our planning committee, HR, our exec team. We're using Google Meet, live streams, our internal social site, signage. Again, we're trying every which way to reach our partners to ensure that it's front and center for them and that we're helping them consume the information and process the change in the way that works for them. But we will be very firm on ensuring people are taking care of themselves and thus taking care of our campus and everyone else there. Tim?
Yeah, thank you very much, Sarah. Very helpful overview. And I'm going to bring both Michelle and Cal back into the discussion here. And in a minute here, go to questions. We've got a lot of questions from our viewers. I'm, kind of absorbing what all three of you are saying. And I think about Wisconsin and the safer at home order. And we've talked about, safer at home is probably keeping about 5 to 6% of our economy closed down. The other 25 to 30% is due to the confidence of consumers and employees. And, just observation listening to the three of you talk, it's going to be some time before your campuses are full, which means, less driving, less purchases of gas, fewer business lunches, fewer business dinners, less travel, meetings. And so all this is going to roll through the economy in a much slower fashion than I think people are anticipating as businesses start to come online as government orders change. So it's a really interesting perspective. Chris, let's bring some questions in.
Sure. Our first question, probably for everybody, is if employees tell you that they won't comply with the return policy, how will you handle that?
I'm smiling as we're hearing it already. There are partners across our business who would rather not wear a mask on campus, and that's the beauty of partner choice. And so we are going to be firm about requiring masks and social distance, and our culture at Direct Supply is one where we have guidelines, not rules. And so this is going to be new for our people. So we will ask, we will remind, and we will require. And if partners are uncomfortable, we are certainly encouraging them to continue to work from home, which again is part of the partner choice piece. Please work where you're comfortable. And if it's not at the office, do so from home.
Very similar to Sarah, we provide guidelines, and so we will encourage both our employees and our associates to wear face masks and face covering. But we've not started that process yet, so we've not had to actually address that particular concern. But it is, as of now, a recommendation and not a requirement. But that is part of our culture.
Yeah, and we have the importance of flexibility is being conveyed here is really important when working with our employees, and having that local managerial to employee conversation. So we've got guidelines, absolutely, but that'll be the really important part is how is that handled on that case by case basis.
Cal, this next question was directed to you, but Michelle and Sarah, feel free to jump in if you want. You had, I believe you mentioned your interaction with field reps. You said the virtual went really well, but how do you have a full give and take like you might have in an in-person meeting? Are there any tips that you found have worked with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. That part is definitely different. There's no denying it. And so part of it, I do wonder, in this near-term part of this event, we aren't overtly acknowledging this, but we're leveraging all the relationships that we've built up to this point. And so even working from home or working remotely and these team meetings and things like that, we're kind of drawing down some of that that built up surplus or that we have in our relationship bucket. And so that can carry us forward for a period of time. I think, a good period of time. So that helps with that interaction and that virtual type meeting. It certainly requires a lot more structure and planning and having cameras even just to have those visual cues are really important, so you don't keep stepping all over each other. But yeah, I won't deny that there aren't problems either in technology and so I don't know, that's what I would say. There's no magic bullet that I've been aware of, but like I said, it worked really well.
Michelle and Sarah, if you have any thoughts on that topic.
I don't have anything to add to Cal. I mean, it is a learning for everyone. We've done actually prior to this, prior to COVID, we've done some virtual trainings. And one of the things, depending the size of the group, is to break them out in groups and then have them come back in a larger group. But it's, agreeing on what are the operating norms for that team, and every team is different. To Cal's point, it depends on the relationship and what's the relationship that was there before, how they interacted. There are some teams who we are using Microsoft Teams. Some teams have been using Microsoft Teams well before COVID-19. So this is not unfamiliar to them, and they have their own cadence. For those who are new to Teams, a lot more technology challenges and instructions and guidance. And so the first 10 minutes are spent on getting everyone apprised of, the technology. So it is exactly as Cal said, it just depends on the individual, and you have to expect some of the challenges that people face. I've seen, individuals drop their babies off in someone's lap while on the middle of a Teams call. I've heard roofers on the top of a roof, dogs barking. I think it's a recognition that we're working in different environments, and we have to be flexible, as Cal noted.
Well, let me jump in here, Chris, and ask a question. So I've heard this described as the next normal or the new abnormal. What do you see, to the extent anything is permanent today, but what have you learned and what do you see as a change that you believe is permanent in your business that people should pay attention to?
Tim, I would say we did a study just in the fall, and we released it in January, February time period called What Workers Want. And flexibility has always been present for a while. And so I think you will see more employees, when their work permits and when performance is there, asking for flexibility and employers allowing it. There's some benefits to it, but as Cal and Sarah have noted, managing it can be a challenge. But we saw data before COVID-19 saying the importance of flexibility. What that couples with is the reduced time in commuting hours, especially in large metropolitan, employees see that as a waste of time. And if they can be more productive in their personal lives or in their work life, they would prefer to have that flexibility and therefore not have that commute. Those are trends that we saw well before COVID, and I would say they are only going to accelerate.
Mm-hmm.
Cal or Sarah?
I would agree. I was going to say that I agree. We're seeing something very similar. And for us, I had mentioned earlier that 20% of our population was remote and the remainder was on one of our campuses. And so it's a learning curve for our teams who aren't global to learn how to lead and how to engage with someone who may not be right next to you. COVID certainly forced that and accelerated the rate of change, and yet we need to work right now to prepare our leaders and our partners on how to do that effectively. So we anticipate people continuing to work remotely so long as we can continue to support the business.
So here's a related question, Cal, and maybe I'll start with you. You gave me the visual of a chessboard in terms of moving pieces, and so you're all describing a future where flexibility is greater. That at some point there's going to be a cure for the virus, and people are going to start to return. So how do I think about the physical workspace? I need now fewer people in a workspace so I can socially distance. They may be coming back in the future. They may want more flexibility. So my head starts to spin as to how you look at the physical place that you work in and how it's set up. How do you think about that, Cal?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that we're thinking through ourselves right now. I would say knowing that this is in the big picture, this is a shorter term event, and so we have like 3 million square feet to think about, and so I'm not going to have our teams overhaul 3 million square feet and remove half the desks and do all kinds of capital intensive type work. So in the meantime, it's and what was just described in the last question too, it's about some of the behavior changes within the space as opposed to overhauling the space itself. So that's the way I'm thinking about it. And so then as it goes back to normal, and we have people coming back, it can be that collaborative space that it once was, because again, I think, and this is, from our business's perspective, not only are financial advisors built on relationship business, but internally and culturally we are too. And so I believe that we will get back to that at some point in the future. And so our businesses, our business space is already set up to be pretty flexible. If you've been in the new tower that we had down on the lake there, all the workstations are flexible, they're on wheels, they can move things and things like that. So the good news is, I think between technology capabilities and the workspace itself being flexible, we can adapt as we need to in those outer years as people come back in. So that's the way I kind of think about it.
Okay. Chris, other questions?
Yeah, we had one interesting question that is part of a broader national conversation. How are you considering the insurance issues that exist and possible liabilities regarding employee safety?
So it's one that we're still investigating. I know California just came out with a law pertaining to workers' comp, so still getting up to speed with it. But it's obviously a concern, and that insurance happening in a couple of places, a couple of ways. One, workers' comp, if someone is on site and they ultimately attract the virus and become infected, what happens and what does that mean? But the other is, even for those who are working from home, what could happen in the home? Could it be considered workers' comp? And those are things that we are evaluating like all other companies. And I can't offer you an answer. We're still learning, and we're waiting in many cases for laws to be passed. I know the federal government is looking at potential legislation also to protect employers.
Sarah, what's direct supply's strategy? Let's say you have a handful of workers on campus that test positive. What happens?
Great question. If someone tests positive, we're asking that they alert their HR business partner immediately, as well as their leader. And then we are going to go into a mode of contact tracing to understand, where did that partner sit? Who did they meet with? What kitchen did they use? What water cooler? What coffee machine? We are literally going to be tracing their movements to understand where they've been. And then we have a detailed communication plan to not only touch base with that partner along the way, but also the teams, the individuals, and the buildings that have been impacted. And we'll obviously determine on a case-by-case basis what we do. We're also in the process of looking into contact tracing software. So I know Apple and Google have come out with some platforms. There's a lot of I'd say opinion on the privacy matters related to that, whether partners want to participate, but we are exploring it as an option, because as people come back to work and as we anticipate there may be more cases, I think it's going to be difficult to manually contact trace the paths that our partners have been on. So we're looking at it in a number of ways.
And then, do you have a clear understanding of what happens from the perspective of the local health department, the state, or the CDC in terms of what they're going to require you to do? Do they come in and ask you to close the business for a certain period of time, or how that works?
I haven't been given the sense that we would necessarily need to close the business. Our campus is unique in that our main campus is spread out over a large area, and we have 10 distinct buildings. And so if there were an incident and it was contained, we may be in a position to close that building. So we're working with our campus operations team as well as our legal team to ensure the proper reporting and swift action to keep our people and our guests safe.
Right. Chris?
Another question about what milestones and data your companies will look at in order to move through the different phases of return in your plans.
Go ahead, Cal.
So our milestones include probably all the typical ones that are out there, including what's going on in city local government regulation, that whole set of information. We also, as fortunate would have it, our company has medical staff on staff, because we do medical underwriting and things. So we leverage their information, their contacts, and looking at CDC and all those other things, and then applying it to ourselves. So we look at that in order to help, it certainly helped frame what I described before about a very slow ramp up and phase in. So we look at that. The other thing that we look at, from a practical perspective is, again, this concept of, I would say two things. One is, what are employees feeling? And the other thing is, from a business perspective, what's the productivity that we're seeing? So right now, as a company, our April had the best sales month in forever, and May is looking the same way. It's crazy. So from a productivity perspective, we're looking at that. And then from an employee perspective, a couple weeks ago, we surveyed employees and asked them, how are they doing? What are their biggest concerns? What challenges do they have? So it's part of that, employee voice and choice. And so those are other milestones. If we see employee engagement changing or concerns changing or that overall feeling in employees, well, then we'd adapt and adjust along the way. So I think it's that multifaceted approach in order to figure this out.
Let me ask each of you how you're thinking about the kind of new normal and how you're going to address travel. You all have customers, you've got your employees traveling. When does that come back? Does it come back as robustly as it was? How do you think about sending people to conferences? I mean, how does this all fit?
I would say it's slow also, and I think Cal highlighted kind of the progress around it. For us, during the summer, highly unlikely that we would foster and encourage travel. We have seen there are some benefits to leveraging technology, and it's obviously reducing costs associated with travel. But in the fall, we know that engaging with clients, engaging with employees is incredibly important. So we would start reevaluating it again in the fall. Would that just be domestic travel? Probably, definitely, because some countries are still not permitting. I do know countries are evaluating, from country to country in Europe, if they have reduced cases, then are they going to permit travel between? We will evaluate that in Europe, but international travel outside of, within continent travel of Europe, highly unlikely that we would be actively supporting that until, quite frankly, 2021.
Similarly, we are following very similar protocols to what Michelle outlined. Very little travel during the summer unless otherwise necessary. Now we do serve senior living, so if there is a case where we do need to be out in a building doing an install, we'll take all precautions to make sure our partners are safe and our customers and the residents are safe. But for the most part, very limited travel, and it requires executive approval before traveling at this point. And so I foresee that well into the fall. And to Michelle's good point, technology has shown us there's a new way of working, and we can connect and build rapport and even do tours virtually. And so we will continue to make use of that technology. In regard to our partners who are traveling, because many of them have personal vacation plans that some are choosing to keep, and depending on where they're going, we're asking that they quarantine themselves before coming back to the office, as if they're going to a hotspot area or a CDC identified country, we really don't want to bring that risk back into the office.
Chris?
Yeah, Tim, we had a question about the MMAC's role in making recommendations on work-safe practices and helping companies get personal protective equipment. So I'm going to put a couple of links here in the chat panel for people to visit. But I'm also wondering about our panelists, the availability of personal protective equipment and other issues like that, how might you handle that?
Yeah, I'll start, Chris, and then let them respond. So thanks to Cal and Sarah and Michelle and others. I know we have a good Chief Human Resource Officer group going. We've got a lot of good data on our website. I know Manpower and others do too. So you can see best practices, you can see the plans that people are putting out, and you can adapt them for your business. So I think this is a point in time where business collaboration is really critical to help instilling confidence in both the consumer and across the board for employees, and a great way in which companies can help one another ramp back up. I'll let you all talk about Chris's question about, as we come back, just access to PPE, which has really been challenging for our healthcare facilities, but now it's going to roll out as you bring your employees back.
So we've had our procurement team investigating country to country. Obviously, trying to have a global approach to this became problematic for several reasons, but we've looked at it more at country to country, and then it became regional to regional. And so within Wisconsin, we found a local supplier to help support. And we're doing the same thing almost in every state or in every country in which we operate, really looking at local suppliers who shift their production to provide at minimum face covering, if not, kind of formal PPE N95. So it's, and we are working across a number of CHRO groups who are providing us, insights into who's producing and where we could go. But I don't have anything scientific to provide other than that.
Right, and I just add similarly, we've been, the last 2 months, there's been so many connections among businesses and vendors and suppliers and things like that. So our sourcing and procurement area has been working to identify and source some materials. And of course, not surprisingly, you get as much of material as you think you need to handle the lead time for the next order based on your assumptions about how much you need. So that's what we've done. And just, it's important, you got to plan ahead for sure.
So will you all have a certain requirement for the kind of mask that you need to wear? Will you supply it to employees as they come to work? How do those protocols roll out?
For us, for our employees, just face covering for our employees. For our associate, it depends on the environment and the client with whom they are placed. So some are requiring N95, some are requiring kind of official mask, but others are just facial covering. So it could be a cloth. So it really is driven by what is required and the client is mandating for us.
We're providing the 3-ply loop masks for all of our partners to wear. We sent each of our partners a care package at home with a box of masks and a thermometer. And while they're using that, we're also providing masks on campus as well for them to use. For any deep cleaning protocols, our campus operations team are using the N95 or the KN95s for deep cleaning for safety reasons.
Great. Chris?
Yep.
Yeah, Sarah, we had a couple of questions about the UV light and air cleansing technology that you mentioned. Could you provide a little more detail? I was pretty interested too.
Oh, sure. I will do my best. I am no campus operations professional or an HVAC professional, but essentially what I understand to be the case, and we can certainly circle back with the MMAC, the technology that we're looking at, this bipolar needlepoint ionization, essentially helps purify the air and it neutralizes the pathogens. And so it's something new that we'll be looking at, obviously for customer purpose, but we wanted to use it in our own facilities to keep people safe. And so certainly we can circle back afterward, but it is something we're really proud of, and that will be in all of our buildings by the end of summer.
Do any of you have best practices recommendations on administering temperature checks for employees or customers?
Yes, we're asking partners to take their temperature before coming to work. We've provided them with a thermometer that's infrared. We've given them instructions on how not only to use the thermometer, but also wear their masks. And we're asking that they stay home if they feel ill or have a temperature of 100.4 or greater. Anyone coming to our campus will also be at our guest services on our main campus or down at our technology center in downtown Milwaukee. We'll be having their temperatures taken upon arrival to ensure that they're healthy and well. They're also certifying that they haven't been ill with flu-like symptoms, haven't been exposed to someone who has either had those symptoms or been diagnosed with COVID. So we're really trying to catch it before people even get into our buildings.
Right. We have a similar approach to our temperature screening is going to be, we're asking them to do it before they get on campus. And we've looked at all the different pros and cons with doing it at different locations, and that's where we've decided to land.
And assuming this would be true for visitors too?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, Jeff.
Yes.
Another question we had is a couple of you mentioned the idea of contact tracing. Is that something you're doing with your internal staff, or have you hired somebody to do that for you? And if so, what services are out there that are available?
So we've not hired anyone to do testing, contact tracing, or any tracking. We've not done that. We're learning from a couple of clients outside of the US. So Ferrari, for example, is one that if you guys saw the Wall Street Journal ad article, we partner with Ferrari and we provide associates there. They're doing antibody testing, they're doing rapid testing, and they're doing tracing. We're getting learnings from them, but it is not something that we are doing actively ourselves. We're just gaining learnings at this point.
Our internal team is doing the contact tracing. Fortunately, we haven't had very many incidences, and like Michelle, we're exploring what options are outside of our internal team. So nothing much there to add.
Yeah, I'm sorry we haven't pursued that either.
So I think go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, one question that I admit I hadn't thought of, but it makes sense. Have you thought of employing a dress code on video calls? I'd probably be violating that right now.
You know what's funny about that is I think the feedback that we've received has all been about how this is making everybody more human and personable, and like Michelle said, you see dogs running in the background, and so I think we're all embracing this. I've heard of some people having, you know, pajama day or whatever. I don't know. It's just, you know, I'm not advocating that, but I think this is we're at a comfort level here that we're all human.
Yeah, before this, and Jonas and I tease about this often, I'm an advocate of dress for your day. So I think it depends on what you have. So I put on a jacket for this call. Did I put on a jacket yesterday calls? No.
We have a very casual work environment, so our partners are staying true to our culture at home as well, and they're all very casual and yet presentable. And we have any number of memes circulating on the topic as well.
Let me just kind of wrap up with one question for each of you. And the visual I have is kind of the cartoon with the CEO in a hazmat suit standing in front of the workplace saying it's safe, come back to work. What's the number one thing each of you think you need to do to instill that confidence that employees can come back to work safely and can start to engage in the economy safely?
Tim, I don't think it's just one thing. I think it's, Cal and Sarah have hit on some of these, but obviously providing a measured approach to coming back to work. That first tell any employees you're not just interested in getting folks into the office, you do care about them. Providing the appropriate PPE based off of the environment and conditions. And providing, ensuring that the facility is safe and the appropriate cleaning. But then I think a big one, and we've been trying to do, is communicating with transparency. We do not have all the answers. We also know that there will be ups and downs in this, having learned from our Singapore office, having learned from South Korea office, having even learned from Germany, that this will be ups and downs. And so being transparent, I think, versus trying to set expectation that everything will go back to normal, I think is very key to ensure engagement with our employees.
Thank you.
Yeah, well said, Michelle. Totally agree, and it's just about conveying that safety, that slow and measured pace, and we're not pushing anybody. We're not pushing anybody. So if you have a comfort level that's a certain degree, then let's meet you where you are, and we'll work through it.
Sarah?
I agree. I think the only thing I'd add is demonstrating it. So as partners come back to our campus, having them feel it and see it and build the trust that way, I think will go a long way. I think what people fear right now is the unknown. And so getting them back and seeing what we're doing to keep them safe, I think will go a long way, and it will take time.
Well, Sarah, Cal, Michelle, thank you for being so gracious with your time. A great range of insights for folks to think about. And I think this is a really good example of kind of giving back to the community and giving back to the business community, and helping us all think about what it's going to take to thrive in the new normal. So appreciate your insights, appreciate your time. We'll be back with this podcast or webcast next Tuesday at 11. For an update on the health and economic impact in the region. Join us at 3:30 this afternoon with Dr. Raymonds. So have a safe, healthy, and productive rest of your day. And again, Michelle, Cal, and Sarah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.